It was March 14th, 1987, and Robert Henley was 42 years old when he signed the papers at Crawford Massey Ferguson in Eldon, Missouri. The dealership smelled like hydraulic fluid and coffee that had been sitting too long. The salesman had already gone over the numbers twice. The Massey Ferguson 3680 sat outside in the lot, red paint bright under a cold spring sun, 140 horsepower, cab with heat, four-wheel drive. Robert's father had driven up separately and was waiting in the truck. He hadn't come inside. Robert signed his name on the loan agreement, and the decision was made. His father didn't speak to him on the drive home. That silence would last 3 weeks, but the debt would last 16 years, and what his son inherited would last longer than either of them expected. Robert had grown up on the same 480 acres in Montague County. His grandfather bought the land in 1936 with money saved from working on the railroad. His father, Eugene, took it over in 1959. The farm raised corn, soybeans, and cattle. It was not a rich operation, but it had never missed a payment. Eugene ran 2 tractors, a Massey Ferguson 165 from 1969 and a Massey Ferguson 255 from 1978, both bought used. He believed in buying equipment other men had already paid the worst years on. He believed debt was something you took on only when you had no other choice, and even then, you got out from under it as fast as possible. Robert had heard these principles his entire life. He understood them. He had agreed with them until the week he didn't. The trouble started in January of 1987. The 255 threw a rod during a cold snap while Robert was moving hay. The engine seized. Eugene wanted to rebuild it. Robert had the tractor towed to a shop in Versailles, and the mechanic said it would cost $4,200 in parts and labor, maybe more if they found additional damage. Eugene said they would do the work themselves. Robert was tired. He had been farming beside his father for 20 years. He was married. His son Michael was 14. His daughter, Anne, was 11. He had been thinking for a long time about what it meant to take something over versus actually own it. The 255 breaking was not the cause. It was the moment. Robert drove to Crawford Massey Ferguson on a Tuesday. He did not tell his father he was going. He walked the lot with a salesman named Jim Corder, who had sold Eugene the 255 9 years earlier. Jim showed him a Massey Ferguson 3680. It was the first row crop tractor Massey Ferguson had built with a factory cab and four-wheel drive in that horsepower range. It was 1986 inventory, still new. The list price was $48,600. Jim said he could do $46,000 if Robert could put down $8,000. Payments would run $640 a month for 10 years at 9% interest. Robert had $11,000 in savings. Eugene did not know about it. It was money Robert had set aside over 15 years from custom work, baling hay for neighbors, and selling cattle separately from the farm account. It was money he had been saving to buy his father out when the time came. Robert told Jim he would think about it. He went home and did not sleep. He lay next to his wife, Karen, and listened to her breathe. He thought about his father rebuilding the 255 in the shop with space heaters running and his hands going numb. He thought about Michael, who was quiet and good with tools, and who had started staying after school for baseball instead of coming home to work. He thought about the kind of farm he wanted to hand over one day, and whether it would be the same kind his father had handed to him. He got up at 4 a.m. and sat at the kitchen table. When Karen came downstairs at 5:30, he told her what he was thinking. She asked if he had talked to his father. He said no. She asked if he was sure. He said he didn't know, but he was going to do it anyway. He went back to Crawford Massey Ferguson on Thursday. He put down $8,000. He signed a 10-year note for $38,000. The dealership arranged delivery for Saturday. Robert drove home and told his father that night after dinner. Eugene was in the shop, organizing bolts. Robert said he had bought a tractor. Eugene asked what he meant. Robert explained. Eugene set down the coffee can he was holding. He asked why Robert hadn't talked to him first. Robert said because he knew what his father would say. Eugene asked if Robert understood what he had just done. Robert said he thought so. Eugene told him that borrowed money had weight, and it didn't matter how new the tractor was, the weight was the same. He said Robert had made a mistake. Then he left the shop and went into the house. Robert stood there alone for a long time. The Massey Ferguson 3680 arrived on a flatbed Saturday morning. Jim Corder drove it off the trailer and showed Robert the controls. The cab was quiet. The heat worked. The four-wheel drive engaged smooth. Robert spent the afternoon driving it around the property, getting used to the weight, the sightlines, the way it pulled. Michael came out and rode with him for an hour. They didn't talk much. When Robert shut it down and climbed out, Eugene was standing by the machine shed. He looked at the tractor for a long time. Then he turned and walked back to the house. He did not say anything about it for 3 weeks. Spring work started late that year. Rain delayed planting until mid-April. Robert used the 3680 to pull the disc and then the planter. The tractor had power the old equipment never had. He could cover more ground in a day. He finished planting corn in 5 days instead of 8. Eugene ran the 165 for bean planting and side work. They worked separately. They did not talk about the tractor. Karen asked Robert if he regretted it. He said no, but he didn't sound sure. The first payment came due in May. Robert wrote the check. It was the largest single check he had ever written that wasn't for land or hospital bills. He put it in the mail and felt something tighten in his chest that didn't go away. The farm had a good year in 1987. Corn prices were decent. Beans came in strong. Robert made his payments on time. Eugene thawed slightly by fall, but the distance remained. At Thanksgiving, Eugene's brother asked about the new tractor, and Eugene said Robert would have to answer that. Robert said it was working well. The conversation moved on. Michael asked if he could drive the 3680 the next season. Robert said maybe. Michael had started talking about college. He wanted to study engineering. Robert had assumed Michael would farm. He had not said so out loud, but he had assumed it the way you assume the sun will come up. The idea that Michael might leave had not been part of the plan when Robert signed the papers. In 1988, Robert made his payments. The farm had an average year. Prices were softer, but yields were acceptable. In 1989, drought cut yields by 30%. Robert sold cattle early to cover expenses. He made his payments, but there was no money left over. Eugene said nothing, but Robert could feel the judgment. In 1990, prices dropped again. Robert took a second job driving truck during the winter. He was gone 3 days a week. Karen managed the books. Michael graduated high school and enrolled at Missouri S&T in Rolla. He received a partial scholarship, but the rest came from loans and money Robert and Karen had saved. The cost was $4,800 a year. Robert made his tractor payment every month and his son's tuition payment every semester, and the gap between what came in and what went out narrowed to almost nothing. Eugene's health started to decline in 1991. He had a heart attack in July, a mild one, but it slowed him down. He was 69. He could still drive the 165, but he couldn't handle heavy repairs anymore. Robert did more of the work. The 3680 carried the load. It ran long days without trouble. Robert changed the oil, greased the fittings, replaced filters. The tractor was built solid, and it did not break down. That reliability became something Robert leaned on, but it also meant there was no easy excuse to stop making payments. In 1992, Eugene had a second heart attack. This one put him in the hospital for 10 days. When he came home, he told Robert he was done. He said Robert should buy him out. Robert asked what the terms were. Eugene said they would figure it out. They worked with a lawyer in Tipton and structured a deal where Robert would pay Eugene $1,200 a month for 15 years. The payment started in January of 1993. Robert now had 2 payments. The tractor payment was $640. The farm payment was $1,200. Together, it was $1,840 a month, every month, no matter what the weather did or what the market did. Karen took a job at the county extension office. Her income covered groceries and utilities. Everything the farm made went to payments. Michael came home for Christmas in 1992 and told Robert he had a job offer in St. Louis after graduation. It was with an engineering firm. The salary was $32,000 a year. Robert congratulated him. Michael asked if Robert was disappointed. Robert said no, but the word came out flat. Michael went back to school, and Robert did not bring it up again. The winter of 1993 was hard. Prices were low. Robert sold equipment he didn't need, an old grain wagon, a disc he had replaced, some fence panels. He made his payments. In March, the 3680 needed a clutch. The repair cost $1,900. Robert put it on a credit card. In May, a late freeze killed early bean sprouts, and Robert had to replant 40 acres. Seed cost $100. He borrowed the money from Karen's brother. By summer, Robert was working every day and falling behind every month. He refinanced the tractor loan in August, extending it 5 more years to lower the payment to $520. It helped, but it also meant he would be paying on the tractor until 2003, 16 years after he bought it. Michael graduated in May of 1994 and moved to St. Louis. He came home twice that first year. Ann graduated high school in 1995 and went to community college in Jefferson City. She studied accounting. She met a man from Herman and married him in 1997. She did not move back to the farm. Eugene's health worsened. He had a stroke in 1996 and lost mobility on his left side. Robert moved him into a care facility in California, Missouri. The cost was $2,800 a month. Medicare covered part of it. Robert covered the rest. He sold half the cattle herd to pay the first 6 months. Eugene died in March of 1998. He was 76. The funeral was small. Michael came home for 3 days. Ann came with her husband. They stood in the cemetery. And Robert thought about the fact that his father had spent the last 11 years of his life watching Robert make payments on a tractor Eugene had never believed in. After Eugene's death, the farm payments stopped, but by then, Robert had accumulated other debts. The credit card balance was $8,400. He owed Karen's brother $3,200. He still owed 3 years on the tractor. In 1999, crop prices were the lowest they had been in a decade. Robert planted every acre and prayed for volume. The yield was good, but the price per bushel was not enough. He ended the year $4,000 in the red. In 2000, he worked custom jobs all summer, baling and hauling for neighbors. The 3680 ran 14-hour days. Robert's back started to bother him. He was 55 years old. He thought about how many years he had left in him and whether the farm would still be there when those years ran out. The final tractor payment cleared in April of 2003. Robert was 58. He had owned the Massey Ferguson 3680 for 16 years. He had paid $38,000 in principal and $16,780 in interest, a total of $54,780 for a tractor that listed for $46,000. The morning after the last payment, Robert walked out to the machine shed and stood in front of the tractor. It looked the same as it had the day it arrived. The paint was faded in places. The cab door handle was worn. The seat was cracked. But the engine was sound. The transmission was tight. It started every time. Robert had put 9,400 hours on it. He stood there for a long time and he did not feel relief. He felt tired. Michael called that summer. He said his firm was expanding and he had been promoted to senior engineer. He was making $78,000 a year. He had bought a house in Chesterfield. He asked how the farm was doing. Robert said it was fine. Michael asked if Robert needed help. Robert said no. Michael said he could send money if things were tight. Robert told him to save it for his own family. Michael had gotten engaged. The wedding was planned for October. Robert and Karen drove to St. Louis for the ceremony. It was held in a hotel ballroom. The reception cost more than Robert had spent on equipment in 5 years. Michael introduced Robert to his colleagues. They asked what he did. Robert said he farmed. They nodded politely and moved on. In 2004, diesel prices spiked. Operating costs went up 30%. Robert cut back on fertilizer and risked the yield. The gamble paid off. The crop was average, but the margins were tight. In 2005, a wet spring delayed planting, and Robert lost 10 days. He pushed the 3680 hard to make up time. The tractor handled it. In 2006, Robert turned 61. He started thinking about when he would stop. Karen asked if he had talked to Michael about taking over. Robert said no. Karen asked why. Robert said because Michael had his own life. Karen said Robert should ask anyway. Robert didn't. In 2007, commodity prices surged. Corn hit $4.20 a bushel, the highest Robert had seen in 20 years. He had a good crop and a good year. For the first time since 1987, He finished a year with money in the bank. He paid off the credit card. He paid off Karen's brother. He bought a used Massey Ferguson baler to replace one that had been held together with baling wire and hope. The relief lasted through the winter. In the spring of 2008, fuel prices spiked again, and input costs doubled. The profit from 2007 evaporated by June. Michael and his wife had a daughter in 2008. Robert and Karen drove to St. Louis to meet her. Her name was Emma. Robert held her and thought about the farm and whether she would ever see it. Michael's wife worked in marketing. They had a second car and a landscaping service. Michael showed Robert the backyard and talked about putting in a pool. Robert nodded. On the drive home, Karen asked what he was thinking. Robert said he didn't know. In 2010, Robert had a health scare. Chest pains sent him to the emergency room in Jefferson City. The doctors ran tests and said it was stress and high blood pressure. They gave him medication and told him to slow down. Robert went home and planted beans the next week. The 3D680 had 14,000 hours on it by then. A mechanic from Eldon came out to look it over and said the tractor had another 10,000 hours in it. Easy if Robert kept up the maintenance. Robert asked what it was worth. The mechanic said maybe $18,000 on a good day. Robert had paid $54,780 over 16 years for a machine now worth a third of that. He did not mention it to Karen. Michael called in 2011 and said he wanted to bring Emma to the farm for a weekend. Robert said that would be fine. They came in June. Emma was 3 years old. Michael walked her around the property and showed her the cattle. Robert fired up the 3680 and let her sit on his lap while he drove it around the field. She laughed and pointed at everything. Michael took pictures. That night, after Emma was asleep, Michael asked Robert what his plan was. Robert asked what he meant. Michael said for the farm, for retirement. Robert said he hadn't decided. Michael said he had been thinking about it. He said he knew Robert had hoped he would come back and take over, and he wanted Robert to know that wasn't going to happen. Robert said he understood. Michael said he felt guilty about it. Robert told him not to. Michael asked what Robert would do with the land. Robert said he would probably sell it when the time came. Michael asked when that would be. Robert said he didn't know. They didn't talk about it again that weekend. Michael and his family left on Sunday. Robert stood in the driveway and watched them drive away. Karen came up beside him and took his hand. She asked if he was all right. Robert said yes. She asked if he meant it. Robert said he didn't know what else to say. That week, Robert went back to work. He ran the 3680 through bean planting and never thought about selling it. The tractor was 25 years old and still the backbone of the operation. He had paid it off 8 years earlier, but in a way he was still paying for it. The cost wasn't in the monthly check anymore. It was in the time he had spent making those checks and the things that had shifted while he wasn't looking. In 2013, Robert turned 68. He still farmed all 480 acres. His back hurt most mornings. His hands were stiff. The 3680 started harder in the cold, but it still started. He replaced the battery and the starter solenoid. A hydraulic line cracked, and he patched it with a splice kit. The tractor had 16,800 hours. Robert had owned it for 26 years, longer than he had been married when he bought it, longer than Michael had been alive. He thought about that sometimes when he climbed into the cab. He thought about what the tractor had cost and what it had done and whether the two were connected in a way he could measure. Karen retired from the extension office in 2014. She asked Robert when he was going to retire. Robert said soon. She asked what soon meant. Robert said a couple more years. Karen said they should travel. Robert said maybe. They didn't travel. Robert planted and harvested. In 2015, corn prices dropped again. The year was hard. Robert sold a piece of equipment he had been holding onto, an old grain drill, to cover propane for the dryer. In 2016, he had another health scare, a minor stroke that left him weak for 3 weeks. The doctor said he needed to stop working so hard. Robert said he would. He didn't. Michael came home for Christmas in 2016. Emma was 8. She asked Robert if he still had the red tractor. Robert said he did. She asked if she could drive it. Robert said when she was older. Michael pulled Robert aside and said he had been talking to a lawyer about estate planning. He said Robert should think about setting up a trust. Robert asked why. Michael said so the transition would be easier when the time came. Robert asked what transition. Michael said selling the farm. Robert didn't say anything. Michael said he wasn't trying to push, but he wanted Robert to know he and Ann had talked, and neither of them wanted to keep the land. Robert said he understood. Michael said he was sorry. Robert said it was fine. It wasn't fine, but Robert didn't know how to explain that. In 2017, Robert turned 72. He still ran the farm. The 3680 had 18,200 hours. The cab heater didn't work anymore. The radio was broken. The paint was oxidized to a dull rust color in places. But the engine ran smooth. The four-wheel drive still engaged. Robert had rebuilt the clutch a second time in 2014. He had replaced the radiator in 2015. He had patched the exhaust in 2016. The tractor was 31 years old, and it was still the most reliable thing on the farm. That summer, a man from California, Missouri, stopped by and asked if Robert was interested in selling ground. He said investors were buying up farmland in the county. He offered $4,800 an acre. Robert had 480 acres. The math came to $2,304,000. Robert thanked the man and said he would think about it. The man left a card. Robert put it in a drawer and didn't look at it again for 6 months. In January of 2018, he took it out and called the number. The man came back. They walked the property. The man made the same offer. Robert said he needed to talk to his family. He called Michael. Michael said he thought Robert should take it. He said the price was good and Robert had earned the rest. Robert asked what he meant by rest. Michael said time to stop working. Robert said he would think about it. Robert didn't call the man back. He planted in the spring of 2018. The crop was decent. In the fall, he harvested and stored the grain. In December, he had another stroke, a more serious one. He was in the hospital for 12 days. When he came home, he couldn't use his right arm well. Karen said that was it. She said he was done. Robert said he just needed time. Karen said time wasn't going to fix this. Robert didn't argue. He knew she was right. In March of 2019, Robert listed the farm for sale. The asking price was $4,900 an acre. It sold in 40 days to an investor group out of Chicago. The sale closed in June. Robert and Karen bought a house in Tipton, a small ranch on 2 acres. Robert kept the 3680. He had it hauled to the new property and parked it in a pole barn he built behind the house. People asked him why he kept it. He said he didn't know. Karen asked him the same thing. He said maybe he would use it for something. He never did. Michael came to visit in the summer of 2019. Emma was 11. She asked if she could see the tractor. Robert walked her out to the barn. The 3680 sat there in the shadows, engine cold, tires flat in places from sitting. Emma asked why he didn't drive it anymore. Robert said he didn't have anywhere to drive it to. Emma asked if it still worked. Robert said he thought so. He climbed up and turned the key. The engine turned over twice and then caught. It ran rough for a minute and then smoothed out. Robert let it idle. Emma stood beside the tractor and watched. Robert shut it down. He climbed out and closed the barn door. They walked back to the house. Emma asked if Robert missed the farm. Robert said sometimes. She asked what he missed. Robert said he wasn't sure. In 2020, the tractor sat in the barn. Robert started it once a month to keep the battery charged. In 2021, he started it every other month. In 2022, he didn't start it at all. Karen asked if he was going to sell it. Robert said maybe. He didn't. In the spring of 2023, Michael called and said Emma had been accepted to the University of Missouri. She was going to study agriculture. Michael said he didn't know where she got it from. Robert didn't say anything. Michael said Emma wanted to come stay with them for a week in the summer. Robert said that would be good. Emma came in July. She was 15. She had her learner's permit. Robert let her drive his truck into town. On the way back, she asked about the tractor in the barn. Robert said it was just an old tractor. Emma said Michael had told her about it, about how Robert bought it and what it cost and how long he paid on it. Robert asked what else Michael had said. Emma said he told her Robert had worked his whole life on the farm and that it was gone now. Robert said that was true. Emma asked if Robert regretted buying the tractor. Robert thought about the question for a long time. He said no. Emma asked why. Robert said because it had done what he needed it to do. Emma asked what that was. Robert said it had kept him farming. They got back to the house. Robert walked Emma out to the barn. He opened the door. The 3680 sat there in the dim light, covered in dust, tires flat, paint faded. Emma walked around it. She ran her hand along the fender. She asked if it still ran. Robert said he didn't know. He climbed into the cab and turned the key. The engine cranked slow. It turned over 4 times and caught. Black smoke puffed from the exhaust. The engine knocked once and then settled into a rough idle. Robert let it run. He climbed down. Emma stood beside him. She asked what he was going to do with it. Robert said he didn't know. She said he should keep it. Robert asked why. Emma said because it mattered. Robert asked how. Emma said she didn't know exactly, but she thought it did. Robert shut the tractor down. He and Emma walked back to the house. That night, Emma asked if she could come back next summer and work on the tractor with him. Robert said if she wanted to. Emma said she did. Michael picked her up 2 days later. After they left, Karen asked Robert what he and Emma had talked about. Robert said the tractor. Karen asked if he was going to keep it. Robert said yes. She asked why. Robert said because his granddaughter asked him to. Karen said that was a good reason. Robert agreed. The Massey Ferguson 3680 is still in the barn. Robert is 78 now. He doesn't farm anymore. The land he worked for 50 years belongs to someone else. Michael lives in St. Louis and visits twice a year. Anne lives in Herman and calls every few weeks. Emma is a sophomore at Mizzou studying agricultural economics. She comes to visit during breaks. Last summer, she and Robert changed the oil in the tractor and replaced the fuel filter. They got it running smooth. Emma asked if Robert ever thought about what would have happened if he had listened to his father and rebuilt the 255 instead. Robert said he had. She asked what he thought. Robert said he didn't know if it would have changed anything that mattered. The debt was real. The years were real. The distance it created was real. But the tractor had kept him on the land longer than he might have stayed otherwise. And that was real too. Robert doesn't talk about the decision much. When people ask why he kept the tractor, he says it still runs. That's true, but it's not the whole answer. The whole answer is that the Massey Ferguson 3680 is the thing his son left behind without ever touching, and the thing his granddaughter came back to without ever knowing why. It cost Robert 16 years of payments and more than that in ways he still doesn't fully understand. But it's the only piece of the farm he still owns, and some days that feels like enough.